Welcome to the world-changing podcast.
Was that too much? Yeah, that was probably too much. But we'll keep it anyway. How about this? If we do the podcast and the world doesn't change, then we can take that out. Welcome to the World-Changing Podcast, where we deconstruct the projects and products that are moving us towards a decentralized and carbon-free future. We'll talk to the skeptics, supporters, and innovators in the fields that depend on electricity to run their industries, which is changing every single day. I'm your host, Greg Robinson, co-founder of Aston Labs, a decentralized infrastructure company. And on the other side of the camera here, we have Flo Lumsden, our producer, and she will make sure that the train stays on the tracks while we do this. I think, okay, so season two.
Welcome to season 2 of the World-Changing Podcast.
Are we going to do that again?
Yes.
Okay.
No, maybe not. No, we're not going to do that again. I just wanted to do it since you got to.
Yeah, that's right. I got to do it on the first season.
And I'm just had 2 cups of coffee, so.
So this season, we're going to talk about major challenges and some solutions. Last season, we sort of set the scene for just a lot of topics.
You recently wrote a blog with someone on the team about 5 challenges to modernizing the power grid.
Mm-hmm. So
So like the themes that we've talked about in this blog are reliability, geography, NIMBY, incentives, and finance/risk.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like the who, where, when, why, how of challenges. Last season, we spent most of our time talking amongst ourselves or talking to other people about these big concepts, right? And these key challenges to modernizing the grid and greening the grid just came up over and over, right? Like when we talked to Gary Ratcliffe, or we talked to Seamus Delbora, or we talked to you and I talked about community solar, and the big one for sure was when we talked nuclear with Alan Hoffman. It was like the NIMBY piece and all of that was a big part of it. So this season, we're now going to focus on those challenges that came up.
So I thought it'd be helpful to set up this season with a brief description of each of these challenges.
Yep.
As a reference for folks if they want to come back and listen to this, or if they haven't read the blog.
Yep. Or just go read the blog too.
Or
and
do both.
Come back and we'll come back for the longer version of this. Yes. So going down the list is like a core premise of just the physics of how electricity works. The dream of having everything run on 100% renewable energy. One of the biggest things that people push back on is reliability.
Right.
It's always been a favorite talking point of the fossil fuel industry is the reliability, the fact that the sun goes down, the fact that the wind sometimes doesn't blow. So the core tenet with reliability is that generation, or when we make power, it always has to match when we consume power. It has to.
Right. So challenge number 1 is reliability. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's challenge number 1.
The first one of our 5.
Yes. That is one of the big challenges. It has to always equal each other. Number 2, in no particular order, is geography. Where the power is made for renewable energy, where it's sunny, where it's windy, is not necessarily where it needs to be used. Mm-hmm. So we have to ship it somewhere. And shipping power is hard. It takes transmission lines, wires. Number 3, NIMBYism, not in my backyard. This is also a favorite. They never really understood how fossil fuels didn't have this issue too.
Right.
Nobody really wants a gas plant in their backyard.
No. I recently learned that a common theme in cities is that the east side of the city is a lower income part. And that's because typically the wind blows from west to east. So whatever pollution is being spewed out in the area will be flowing from west to east.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. So not in my backyard. Definitely the nuclear is where that's going to come up the most, but you would think it would only be something like nuclear, but it's not. Like some people don't want, actually where I grew up, there's a wind farm development that got shut down because people didn't want to look it up off in the lake. And so it was going to be on an island.
Right.
And then, so yeah, wind, nuclear, even solar panels, really. Like, you have homeowners associations that don't want the solar panels on the roof because they think that it'll be an eyesore. So all of that. It's like, even some of the people who love clean energy and the most will be like, nah, but maybe not right here. Let's move it down the street a little ways. Number 4, incentivization.
Yes.
You and I talked about this at length when we were talking about power utilities and just like what is the incentive for a power utility to innovate? If it jeopardizes our lights staying on, there's no way they're going to do it.
Yeah, and it's basically a legally allowed monopoly because it's still a business. Right.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, it's investor-owned utilities for sure. And then number 5. So we could go deep into this incentivization, by the way. So going back to incentivization,
I want to add one other example from our conversation with Mark, our first full episode coming after this intro with Mark Jacobson. He talked about if he could change one thing in terms of removing red tape or changing the way things work to green the power grid, he would change the incentives so that we're not incentivizing the development of carbon capture through the Inflation Reduction Act. So he definitely mentioned incentives. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's like the incentive to change, but there's also what are you incentivizing going forward? Which in that case, obviously the Inflation Reduction Act incentivizes a lot of people to do a lot of things. And direct air capture maybe should
something
be
we
on the
talk
list.
a lot about in the first episode.
Yeah. And then my favorite one, challenge number 5, financing.
Is it really your favorite?
It's my favorite. It's my favorite because I think it's at the end of the day, all of these esoteric things that we do to try to get clean energy, all of these clean energy programs, incentives programs, community solar programs, virtual power purchase agreements, corporate purchasing of renewables, all of those things are to help underwrite the financing. It's just to make it bankable.
Right.
And everything. If there was a big pile of money to just build stuff with, you wouldn't even have to think about this part. But all the hoops you have to jump through, the interconnection studies, the interconnection agreements, the power purchase agreements, everything is just de-risking. And it's de-risking the financing.
And I think a lot of what folks are dealing with in terms of raising the money to build renewable power plants or install windmills offshore or create new transmission lines to connect generation to load. It's all very, theoretically very bankable, but a lot of the issue I perceive is just a lack of momentum or just historical foundation to prove that it's bankable, even if there aren't as many existing frameworks to make these new investments easy to fund.
Right. Like mortgages.
Right.
That's a pretty well-worn path, right? You can't go online and just click a button and get yourself
and oil and gas has been making money for the banks for a long time, so they're very comfortable with that. Even though it might be more expensive and risky, they're just used to those risks and those expenses. Right. That's all.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like that word bankability it's like the craziest moving target in this industry, because depending on where you go, bankable means something completely different. Like you could have something that's not bankable because it's in the path of Tornado Alley. You can have something that's not bankable because you can have a project that's not bankable because just the credit worthiness of the person buying it. And it's like, well, that person that's buying it and can buy enough renewable energy has a big enough balance sheet to underwrite a project. Depending on them means we have to build typically bigger, more centralized, more cookie cutter projects. And then the bigger that balance sheet is that's underwriting it, the lower the margins have to be, or the lower the profits have to be to the person actually selling it to them, because the balance sheet or the person who's making it bankable is in control of the profits, which is sort of counter to house development. Like if you're building housing, if you're building, it's a little different now, but if you're building houses or you're building commercial buildings or you're building any of those other types of real estate, to your point about oil and gas, they're just, the banks or the lenders feel more comfortable because they've been doing it for
it's just fear of
decades,
the
if
unknown.
not centuries. Right.
And change is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it's my favorite, is because it's like, that's really the biggest unlock in this, is if we can figure out how to overcome that particular challenge in a very simple way that, and I think most importantly, that like gets the risk correctly priced. And what I mean by that is it's a little bit risky, but it's not that risky. I actually saw a tweet the other day by Sam Altman kind of about this, which is just like, what price should you be willing to borrow money at to build AI infrastructure, like data centers? What price should you borrow? It's like, if you knew that this massive, massive, massive demand for data centers was coming with AI, wouldn't you just take a little more risk? Like, wouldn't you? I don't know if this. I'm putting words in his tweet. I'm expanding it. I'm expanding his tweet. But my point is, like, wouldn't you pay a higher price? And I think in the energy business for a long time, it's been either it gets built, either it's bankable or it's not, rather than saying, no, what's the risk and what is the rate on the money? And I think that's going to be our biggest. That's why it's my favorite, again, is because that's where I think there's the most potential for innovation. I think some of those other ones are tricky. Like NIMBYism, that's a tricky one to innovate against. Like invisibility cloak. I think that's the only option for those.
Well, people are used to seeing oil rigs out on the ocean.
That's what I mean. It's like,
why can't we put some windmills? Are they worse than the oil rigs?
I think to your point, it's like, they're not worse. They're new.
They're just different.
They're just new. Right. It's like, but those have been there my whole life. And when I showed,
they're horrible. They're so scary looking.
It's
like little aliens landed out in the ocean. This is only on the West Coast I'm talking about. I've never seen them on the East Coast, but
yeah, that's true. And very expensive places too, right? It's not like, where did you see them?
Santa Barbara.
Yeah,
mostly.
I think that's where I've seen them. Yeah.
Well, I think that's good. I think that's good for the intro to season 2.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the World Changing Podcast. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, to hear the latest episodes.